Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real honour to be here today and to think of how much the world has changed since the last time I was in this House. I have just spent a little more than 40 days, basically, in isolation, and I started to think about that term. Quarantine means 40 days. It's a biblical image. You know, it was the 40 days that Jesus was wrestling in the desert. It was 40 days and 40 nights of the flood. The Israelites were 40 years in the desert. But what's really profound about it, Mr. Speaker, is the quarantine comes from the age of the Black Plague because it was one of the only tools they had to fight the pandemic. And it is sobering to realize in the 21st century that we're having to return to the tools that were used in the dark ages to fight a pandemic we fully don't understand. And to realize, Mr. Speaker, how quickly that virus upended everything that our world has talked about and taken as just absolute basic truths that couldn't even be argued. 40 years of economic and social policy overturned as quickly as the Soviet wall in Berlin fell over. So what fell over within the first week of COVID? Well, the belief in the natural superiority of globalization, this belief that we don't even need to have industry in Canada to look after ourselves because we can trust our allies. And we saw when Donald Trump seized medical equipment that was bound for Canada, that globalization agenda failed. When we were getting substandard health products from China, that globalization issue failed, and to see people across the political spectrum talking about the need for an industrial policy that never again will Canada be left in a lurch like that. We learned about the whole privatization agenda, the get government out of your way view that the for-profit is so much naturally superior. And we saw the horrific death levels in the for-profit seniors' homes that we're now having to send the army in to try and keep old people alive. We can never again be in that situation. Never again be in a situation where we have crowdsourcing on Facebook for our frontline medical workers to have medical gear to protect them in a pandemic. But there are other things we learned as well, Mr. Speaker. We learned the incredible social solidarity of Canadians. The Canadians look out for each other. The Canadians do not believe in the race to the bottom. The Canadians don't throw each other out of the lifeboat. You know, I arrived in Ottawa last night and my daughter told me that neighbors came up and put a sign on her door saying, "We know there's students here. If you need any help, call us, because you may not have family here." That is who we are as Canadians. And what we also learned, Mr. Speaker, was the incredible economic power the government has. After all the degrading of federal spending and government money, you know, the Conservatives always telling us that it's going to be corporations and the private sector and the entrepreneurs. Within a week of COVID, everybody was looking for a backstop to stop the worst economic catastrophe in memory. And the steps that we've been debating here have been about the power of social spending to keep our cities livable and our families afloat. And I would put to you, Mr. Speaker, that there is no going back to normal, that the world that was here at the beginning of March that we were debating is gone. And the choice that we need to make is about where we are going to go as a nation. The idea that the market is going to miraculously come back is obviously a myth. What's going to get us out of COVID is going to require intense public investments over the next few years. And if we're going to be spending those public investments to get our economy back up, then the fundamental question we have to be asking ourselves is what kind of investments should we be making? Because it is public money and it is about the public good. And the steps that we take every step of this way, whether it's supporting university students or supporting people with the $2,000 a month basic income that we've supported, has to be the new floor to ensure that we are never again left in a situation as precarious as we were. that our healthcare system is never again left in that situation. You know, I think of in Ontario, and I congratulate Premier Doug Ford. He's certainly shown some passion on this issue. But just before the pandemic, they were shutting down all the public health units because they didn't think we needed them. And they have been the front lines of defending us and saving us right now. So no, we're not going to go back to nickel and diming healthcare into the ground. That's not going to happen on our watch. And Mr. Speaker, the idea of the $2,000 minimum, I mean, you can hear it from the Conservatives and the right-wing think tanks and their National Post people saying, oh, you know, they're going to sit on their duffs, they're going to hang out in their hammocks, you know, like they just can't wait for the moment the Conservatives get to decide who gets thrown out of the lifeboat. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, is that we have seen the fact that millions of Canadians within 1 week of COVID did not have enough savings to pay their rent is a staggering indictment of an economic system that has not made sure that we live to the standard that we should be able to live to. And that $2,000 a month, that certainly didn't come from the Conservatives. They were too busy making a tax on people of Asian origin. The $2,000 a month minimum wage idea came from the New Democrats, who said, this is the new base, and we've got the support of the government because they recognized it. So how do we go back then and say, well, now you're going to go back to lousy jobs, lousy contracts in an economy that is not going to have a lot of those jobs for a long time? So the new normal, Mr. Speaker, is about ensuring that the investments that we make from here on in build a better society. And it gives us an incredible opportunity, because what are we going to do in terms of the billions of dollars that we'll need in infrastructure to make cities more livable, to make them more sustainable, to make our society more inclusive and fair? That is our opportunity. Or we could just give it away to the corporate sector, give it away as we've done year in, year out. But I think that that would be a terrible failure, given the fact that what we have left Canadians in such a situation as they have been left in. So, Mr. Speaker, the issues of what we brought forward as New Democrats compared to the Conservatives on this issue, we said $2,000 a month was the minimum. And then we realized that the government was still not working with us on the universal. They wanted to have limits on it. And it's like, well, what about someone who's earning some money? Are they going to be kicked off? No. What about people in the gig economy who have a bit of money coming in, a bit not? To have the $2,000 plus the $1,000, that's been a fair move, and the government's recognized it. It was the New Democrats who said that the wage subsidy at 10% wasn't enough, that it had to be 75%. While the Conservatives were all demanding that we start this new Cold War with China, and they were all waving their flags and pumping their fists, we were speaking about small business and saying we need to make this fair to them. And we got those changes.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands has a point of order.
We're not in question period, so a point of order is allowed. The honourable members who are heckling the member for Timmins James Bay make it more difficult for me to appreciate the brilliance of his remarks. But beyond that, the honourable members who are heckling right now are making the case that Parliament on Zoom is more courteous than Parliament in real life.
Point of order is well taken. The honourable member for Timmins James Bay. I'll let him continue.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague. I certainly know for the colleagues on the other side, the truth hurts. And it hurts a lot. And it should hurt, because of the disinterest that they've shown for people facing the worst economic crisis in memory. The fact that as a nation we need to work together to make sure that we maintain the social solidarity that Canadians are showing. So when we come to Parliament to push the government on the university support for post-secondary, it's not about suggesting, as the Conservatives do, that, you know, it's going to be a cost-benefit analysis where they sleep in all day or where they try and find a job. That's how they see university students. What we see with university students are people burdened down with debt, trying to make a better life for themselves. And when we push government for change, it's because it is doable. We can do this at this time with the kind of federal investments that will be required in the coming years to build a better, a fairer Canada, a Canada that is more sustainable, and a Canada that will never, ever, ever again leave ourselves so precarious as we were with the work, with our savings, with our healthcare system. This is an opportunity for this Parliament to work together to make that happen, to make that new normal the better Canada, because there is no going back to the old normal.
Amen. Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do enjoy hearing my colleague from time to time. Particularly, I appreciated his praise of the response by Premier Ford. You know, I haven't been in the House in a little while, so I don't know if he's been praising Premier Ford consistently over the last number of months or whether that's just been recent. But I am glad to see that all-party approach. My question for him is less about this competition between the Greens and the NDP on having a universal basic income. My question to him is, he's in a party that has been consistently against oil and resource development, consistently against most jobs in the corporate sector. We hear that frequently from them. My question is sincere. If we have no private sector in Canada, where do we pay for all these programs that they like to list in this House, Mr. Speaker? Not everyone can work for a level of government, Mr. Speaker. Not everyone can work for a nonprofit or a charity, Mr. Speaker. How will we pay for our universities, our health care, the $200 billion deficit we will see as a result of this crisis? How are we going to have a V or a U-shaped recovery? Or does he not want a recovery? Does he want that L that just drops and we're going to be permanently impoverished? Or is he willing to turn the NDP position around and start supporting resource workers, start supporting companies like GDLS that build things in this country? Will he change their fundamental aversion to the resource economy?
The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Oh my God, the man who would be king. So this is the state of the Conservative vision for the country. We have the one Conservative leadership candidate who's been promoting fake medicines based on Dr. Trump. Okay, that was one. We have Peter MacKay, who is so enraged that COVID interrupted his leadership race that the Conservative Party had to stop the leadership race to keep Peter MacKay from self-destructing. We have the despicable character who is still in the Conservative caucus, who made racist attacks against Canada's chief medical officer, and we have not heard that man be kicked out. He's still a leadership candidate, which leads me to my colleague, who I actually really like. I think he's putting on this sort of angry grr guy to get the Conservative base. But the idea that he believes that one has to agree with shipping arms to the Saudis, or you're against private industry, that is not a man ready for prime time, Mr. Speaker. I'm urging him to understand that to get our economy back up, it's going to require public investment. He should be working with us. Public investment is going to be required, because we hear them whining they want a lot more money for the oil sector after we spend billions. They're not looking at private money, they're looking at public money, and when it's public money, the public has a say. So I urge my colleague, drop that grimace, show some compassion, show you care. This man could do it, but he's got to get a smile. Just put a smile on, say, you know, Canadians are hard work and we're in this together, and stay away from those other loonies in the leadership race, and he'll do well.
Questions and comments. The honourable member.